The gray Ogden sky wept with me. The rain drummed on the black umbrellas of the crowd, as if trying to drown out the priest's words. I stood by the freshly dug grave, clutching a bouquet of white lilies, my mother's favorite. Mom always said lilies reminded her of purity and new beginnings. Ironically, these flowers were now a symbol of the end. I didn't cry. The tears ended in 3 days of sleepless nights after her death. Heart failure. So simple and trivial for a woman who had experienced so much pain and joy. 59 years too soon. Too unfair. Amen, the priest said, and the crowd echoed after him. People began to disperse, casting sympathetic glances at me. Neighbors, my mother's co-workers, distant relatives. They all came up, said the standard words of comfort, and patted me awkwardly on the shoulder. I nodded and thanked, but my mind was blank. Marilyn was the last to show up. My little sister always knew how to make a spectacular entrance. Even at my mother's funeral, she looked like she was going to a social gathering, perfectly styled blonde hair, a black designer dress that emphasized her slim figure, high-heeled shoes despite the rain-soaked ground. Around her neck sparkled a diamond necklace that I was sure was worth more than my bakery's annual income. Parker walked beside her, tall, trim, with a perfectly trimmed beard and a suit that was clearly worth more than my car. My ex-fiancé, her current husband. 4 years had passed, and something still clenched painfully in my chest at the sight of them together. Not jealousy, but the memory of betrayal. Evie. Marilyn came closer and put her arms around me. She smelled of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. I'm so sorry. Thank you for coming, I replied mechanically, releasing myself from her embrace. Parker, tell the driver we'll be late, she said over her shoulder, not even glancing at her husband. He nodded obediently and stepped away. Typical. Are you coming with us to the wake? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Of course. Marilyn made a sad face. We should pay our respects to Mom. We walked in silence to the cars. My old Ford looked ridiculous next to their shiny black Mercedes. I sat behind the wheel, trying to collect my thoughts before driving to my mom's house. Now my house, I reminded myself. For the past 2 years, I'd been living with my mom, taking care of her. Marilyn hadn't even offered to help. People had already gathered at the house. Mrs. Flanagan, a neighbor, was setting out the snacks the guests had brought. My god-uncle Tom was pouring coffee. Familiar faces, muffled voices, an atmosphere of subdued grief. I made my way to the kitchen to help with the serving. It gave me something to do, a distraction. Through the window, I saw the Mercedes pull up. Marilyn got out first, not waiting for Parker to open the door for her. Even from a distance, I could see her irritatedly reprimanding him. I sighed and went back to arranging the plates. My bakery was closed for the 4th day, and I worried about the financial loss, but I knew it was inevitable. Garrett had said I shouldn't worry about money, but I couldn't help but worry. For too long I'd been managing on my own. Where was he? I checked my phone. There were no messages. Garrett had promised to come as soon as he finished an important meeting in Salt Lake City. I understood that his job required full commitment, but today I needed his support. Evelyn, dear, let me help. Mrs. Flanagan took the stack of plates from me. You're doing too much already. Sit with the guests. I smiled gratefully and went out into the living room. Marilyn was already there, the center of attention as always. She was emotionally recounting some childhood story in which she was undoubtedly the heroine. And my mother always said I was her sunshine. Marilyn sighed theatrically, blotting her dry eyes with a handkerchief. I don't know how I'm going to live without her. I bit my lip. Marilyn visited my mom only once a month, and not for long. She always found excuses. She was busy, or tired, or Parker had a trip planned. But now, of course, she was playing the part of the grief-stricken daughter. Hi, everyone, I said quietly as I approached the group of guests. Thank you for coming. Several people turned to me, offering their condolences. Marilyn gave me an appraising look. I knew how I looked tired, in the simple black dress I'd worn to my father's funeral 8 years ago, my hair in a simple bun. It didn't compare to her impeccable image. The next hour passed in a blurry haze of conversation and memories of Mom. I mechanically answered questions, smiled when appropriate, and counted the minutes until the ordeal was over. Parker kept to himself, shuffling awkwardly from foot to foot and avoiding my gaze. Marilyn, on the other hand, shone, accepting condolences as if she were an only daughter. When most of the guests had dispersed, I went to the kitchen for another pot of coffee. The fatigue came with a renewed vigor. Where was Garrett? I checked my phone again. No messages. Still checking messages? Marilyn's voice made me wince. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the jamb and crossing her arms over her chest. Are you hoping someone will text? Just watching the time, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. You know, Marilyn stepped closer, I've always been amazed at your patience. Or is it inertia? You've been baking the same buns for years in your tiny bakery, living in that old house, wearing the same dress. She ran her hand defiantly over the shiny necklace around her neck. And I always wanted more. And I got it. I remained silent, pouring myself a cup of coffee. My hands were trembling slightly. Poor you, still single at 37. Marilyn lowered her voice to a condescending whisper. I got a husband, money, and a mansion. What did you get? I slowly set my cup down and turned to her. 4 years ago, her words would have hurt me to the core. Today, they only elicited a tired smile. Have you met my husband yet? I asked calmly. Marilyn blinked, her smug expression changing to confusion for a moment. What? What other? At that moment, the front door opened, and footsteps sounded in the hallway. I'd recognize that footstep from 1,000 sure, but not heavy. Garrett. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, tall, in a dark suit, with a slight gray on his temples that only emphasized his attractiveness. I felt the tension of the last few days release a little. I'm sorry I'm late. He came over and hugged me, kissing my forehead. The meeting had dragged on. It's okay. I snuggled against him for a moment, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. This is my sister Marilyn. Garrett turned to Marilyn, whose face was frozen in an expression of disbelief. Pleased to meet you, though the occasion is sad. He held out his hand to her. Garrett Vollmer. Marilyn automatically shook his hand, but it was obvious she was still processing the information. Vollmer? She interjected. How? Honey, you've been looking for… Parker appeared in the doorway and froze when he saw Garrett. The blood rushed from his face. Boss, what are you doing here? The words came out before he could stop himself. There was silence. I could almost physically feel the gears in Marilyn's head turning, the way she was putting two and two together. Mr. Wells? Garrett nodded, his voice professionally neutral. I didn't expect to see you here. Yeah, we… Parker hesitated, shifting his gaze from Garrett to me and back again. Marilyn is my wife, Evelyn's sister. Oh, Garrett raised an eyebrow. Interesting coincidence. Marilyn finally regained her speech. You married Boss Parker? Her voice shook with a mixture of shock and rage. Is this some kind of joke? Life is full of surprises, isn't it? I couldn't hold back a slight smile. Parker looked like he was about to faint. Mr. Vollmer, I didn't know, he began, but Garrett stopped him with a raised hand. Today is not the time for work talk, Mr. Wells. We're here to honor Elizabeth's memory. Marilyn grabbed Parker's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. We have to go, she cut him off. We're already running late. Without waiting for an answer, she dragged him toward the exit. The front door slammed a moment later. Garrett and I were alone in the kitchen. He looked at me with a slight half-smile. That was… interesting. I'm sorry, I sighed. I should have warned you. About what? He put his arm around my shoulders. About your sister's husband working for my company? I knew it, Evie. Of course he knew. Garrett knew everything about his employees. especially partners of Parker's caliber. I just didn't think he'd turn out to be that ex-fiancé, he added more quietly. I clung to him tighter. The last of the guests said goodbye, leaving us alone. The house fell into silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the living room, the same one my father had given my mother for their 20th wedding anniversary. We went upstairs to my old room, which had become my temporary home during the last months of Mom's illness. Garrett helped me take off my shoes and covered me with a blanket. He sat next to me, holding my hand until I started to fall asleep. Through my slumber, I thought about Marilyn, about her shocked face when she saw Garrett, about the years of rivalry and resentment, about how she'd always sought to take everything I loved away from me, toys as a child, friends at school, my parents' attention, and finally, Parker. I remembered her words today. Poor you, still single at 37. If only she knew what I'd been through in those 4 years. How deep I'd fallen after the betrayal, and how slowly, painfully, I'd climbed back up. How I met Garrett and slowly began to trust him. How I learned to believe in myself and my own strength. Marilyn always thought she'd won by stealing Parker. She didn't realize she was actually doing me a favor. My first birthday that I can clearly remember was when I was 6 years old. My mom made a big chocolate cake with pink frosting and 6 candles. I looked forward to blowing them out. I remember everyone singing happy birthday, and me, all dressed up in my new dress, preparing to make a wish. And then something happened that has been repeated countless times since. Marilyn, who was only 4 at the time, squeezed forward and blew out my candles. Everyone laughed. What a funny little girl, so spontaneous. And I stood there with a frozen smile, feeling a lump in my throat. Don't be upset, Evie, Mom said, hugging Marilyn. She's a little girl, she doesn't understand. That became the pattern for all of our subsequent relationships. Marilyn was taking what was mine, and I was supposed to not get upset. In middle school, the situation only got worse. At 13, Marilyn looked 16, tall, with an early feminine shape, while I remained thin and angular. She knew how to charm people with her energy, while I was shy and awkward. In 8th grade, I became friends with Lauren Mitchell. We both loved books and could spend hours discussing what we'd read. 3 weeks later, Lauren stopped talking to me. Later, I learned that Marilyn had told her that I had made fun of her behind her back. Why did you do that? I asked my sister when I found out the truth. I'm doing you a favor, she shrugged. She's too boring for you. Besides, she and I are best friends now, so it's a win-win. When I turned 16, I fell in love for the first time with Nate Dawson, a guy from the same class. We were in literature club together, and he asked me to help with a Faulkner essay. I was over the moon. We met at the library on a Saturday, and it went great. We talked about books, laughed, and he even took my phone number. A week later, I saw him with Marilyn. They were making out by the school lockers. He asked me out on his own, Marilyn said, noticing the look in my eyes. It's not my fault that guys prefer me to you. Mom always took Marilyn's side. You have a good heart, Evie. You'll always make friends. And Marilyn is more vulnerable. She needs more attention, she used to say. I didn't understand how a girl who didn't hesitate to hurt others could be vulnerable. After my father died, when I was 29 and Marilyn was 27, our rivalry seemed destined to end. We were both grown women with our own lives. I opened a small bakery called Sweet Corner, putting my whole soul into it. Marilyn worked in a fashion boutique, had affairs with wealthy men, and often asked her mother for money to pay the bills. I thought I was finally free of my childhood resentments, until I met Parker. We met at a charity event where I was supplying desserts. Parker Wells was one of the sponsors, a tall, confident investment banker with a disarming smile and an amazing ability to listen. He asked about my almond cakes, and instead of the on-duty praise, we suddenly started talking about baking, about the chemical processes involved in caramelizing sugar, about favorite flavors from childhood. I couldn't believe that such a man was interested in me, the most ordinary one, in a simple dress, with flour under my fingernails. But he called the next day and invited me to dinner. Our relationship grew rapidly. 6 months later, Parker proposed to me, at sunset on Mount Ogden, overlooking the valley. An emerald ring, he remembered that I had once mentioned how much I loved that stone. "I've never met a woman like you," he said then. "You're the real deal. With you, I'm more than just a bag of money." My bakery wasn't doing so well. Competition was high in Ogden, and the location wasn't the best. But I loved my little business and didn't want to give it up, even if I married a wealthy man. Parker seemed to respect that. When I showed the ring to my mom, she was thrilled. "You're finally getting your life together," she said, hugging me. "And such a man! I can't believe our quiet girl caught such a fish." Marilyn wasn't around that day. She was away for the weekend with another boyfriend, but I was looking forward to telling her about the engagement. For the first time in my life, I had something she would envy. With some childish part of my soul, I longed for her recognition at last. When Marilyn returned and learned the news, she feigned joy, but I noticed a shadow running across her face. It was an expression I knew well from my childhood. It was the way she would look at the new toys I was given for my birthday before accidentally breaking them. "Parker Wells? The finance guy?" she interjected, looking at the ring. "Wow, sis. How did you manage to get it?" "We just found each other," I said, regretting telling her. "It's so unexpected." Marilyn smiled her feline smile. "He's in a different league, isn't he?" Mom, sitting next to her, laughed. "Don't listen to her, Evie. Parker's very lucky to have you." "Of course he is," Marilyn said. "Who else is going to bake him scones every morning?" I ignored the jab. Marilyn had always considered my passion for baking as something primitive, unworthy of attention. 2 weeks after the engagement announcement, my mother suggested we have a family dinner to celebrate and get to know Parker better. I agreed, though something inside me clenched at the thought of Marilyn and Parker at the same table. That evening, I remembered in great detail. I'd arrived early to help my mom with the cooking. We were making a roast, Dad's recipe that was always made for special occasions. "Do you think he'll like it?" I asked, nervous. "Of course," Mom replied, chopping vegetables. "It's a Hutcher specialty." Parker arrived right on time, with a bouquet for Mom and a bottle of expensive wine. He was charming, attentive, told funny stories about his work, without going into boring financial details. Mom was clearly smitten with him. Marilyn was 40 minutes late. She entered the dining room like a hurricane, in a bright red tight dress, with impeccable makeup and styling, as if she were going to a social party rather than a family dinner. "Sorry I'm late," she said, kissing her mother on the cheek. "I couldn't decide on an outfit for such an important event." Her gaze settled on Parker, and I saw something change in her eyes, a greedy, predatory glint that I'd seen all too often. "So this is the famous Parker." Marilyn held out her hand to him. "I've heard so much about you." Parker stood up to say hello, and for the first time, I noticed him hesitate slightly as he looked at my sister. It was only a second, but my heart skipped a beat. "It's nice to meet you, Marilyn," he said, shaking her hand longer than necessary. "Evelyn has told me a lot about you." "Not all my secrets, I hope." Marilyn laughed, casting a quick glance at me. Dinner turned into Marilyn's personal show. She told stories, laughed, continuously fixed her hair, and leaned forward to emphasize her cleavage. Every few minutes, she found an excuse to touch Parker's hand, passing the salt, asking his opinion, admiring his watch. I sat there as if paralyzed, unable to stop what was happening. Parker seemed politely interested, but I caught his glances at Marilyn when he thought I wasn't looking. Mom, as usual, didn't notice anything odd. "Marilyn's always been the life of the party," she said, smiling. "Not like our quiet Evie." "Evelyn's great," Parker said, taking my hand. "She knows how to listen, a rare quality." "Yes, Evie's always been a good listener," Marilyn said with the same predatory smile. "Especially when it comes to other people's problems. Always ready to help, to support. A real saint." Sometimes I think she should have been a nurse instead of baking buns. My customers appreciate my buns, I said quietly. Of course they do, dear. Marilyn smiled sweetly. I just think that with your love of helping others, you could be doing something more meaningful. Parker looked a little uncomfortable. I think Evelyn's bakery is an art form. What she does with the dough and the fillings is real magic. You're so sweet. Marilyn leaned toward him, lowering her voice to an intimate whisper. Supporting her hobby. It's not a hobby, it's a business. I was starting to get annoyed. Of course, dear. Marilyn leaned back in her chair, keeping her eyes on Parker. By the way, you never told me how you met. Parker began to tell the story of our meeting, and I watched Marilyn literally devour him with her eyes, occasionally biting her lower lip and playing with a lock of hair. It was so blatant, I didn't understand how Parker could not notice, or my mom could think it was normal. After dinner, as we moved into the living room for coffee, Marilyn accidentally spilled some on her dress. Oh dear, how clumsy I am, she exclaimed. Evie, can I borrow some of your things? Something prettier, if you have any. I rose silently and led her into my old room, where some of my clothes were still stored. As soon as the door closed, Marilyn turned to me, dropping her mask of friendliness. Seriously, do you think a man like him is really interested in you? Her voice oozed venom. He's just feeling sorry for you. Look at you, a simple baker, always in flour. What can you give him? I froze, stunned by the directness of her attack. Parker loves me, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Not all men are looking for looks alone. Oh, honey, Marilyn laughed. Do you really believe that? Men like Parker Wells don't marry women like you. They have affairs, maybe date for a while out of curiosity, but eventually they choose their own kind. Parker and I are right for each other, I said stubbornly. We share the same values, the same interests. Like what? Marilyn interrupted. He is interested in investments, yachts, and traveling first class. You're interested in flour and sugar. Don't kid yourself, Evie. He's with you because you're the safe choice. Her words hit the mark. Deep down, I was always afraid I wasn't good enough for Parker, that he'd wake up one day and realize he'd made a mistake. You're just jealous, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. Jealous? Marilyn snorted, picking a blouse out of my closet. Of what? That you'll live in constant fear that he'll find someone better? That you'll always feel out of place among his friends and coworkers? No, honey, I'm not jealous. I pity you. She changed her clothes, threw the soiled dress on the bed, and headed for the door. You're my sister, and I'm saying this for your own good. Men like Parker are not for women like you. The sooner you realize that, the less pain there will be later. With those words, she left the room, leaving me alone with a heavy lump in my throat. When we got back to the living room, Mom and Parker were talking animatedly. He smiled at me, and for a moment my doubts receded. But then, I caught the look he gave Marilyn as she gracefully lowered herself onto the couch beside him, and the worm of doubt stirred again. Over the next weeks, I noticed changes in Parker. He called less often, stayed late at work, was distracted during our meetings. I convinced myself that it had to do with an important project he'd mentioned, that it was temporary. And then, one Saturday, I decided to surprise him by baking his favorite blueberry pie and bringing it to the office where he was working late. I'd never been to his office before. We usually met at restaurants or at my house. The building was almost empty, just a security guard at the entrance who let me through when I explained who I was going to see. The elevator took me up to the 23rd floor. The corridors were dimly lit. The door to Parker's office was ajar, and light poured in. I smiled, imagining his surprise, and walked quietly to the door. And then I heard a laugh, a woman's laugh that I would recognize from 1,000. Marilyn. I froze, unable to move. Through the crack in the door, I could see them, Parker sitting at a table, and Marilyn sitting on the edge of that table, with a glass of wine in her hand. Her shoes were on the floor, and her bare feet were swaying dangerously close to Parker's knees. You should have seen her face when I told her she should have been a nurse. Marilyn laughed. So offended. As if baking cookies was some great calling. Parker laughed too, and the sound broke something inside me. She's very serious about her bakery, he said, and I heard a condescension in his voice that I hadn't noticed before. Are you serious about her? Marilyn asked, leaning closer. Are you really going to marry my boring sister? Parker was silent, and in that pause, all my hope and all my despair were contained. Evelyn, sweetheart, he said at last. She takes care of me. She's at ease. Boring as hell, Marilyn summarized, leaning closer. You deserve someone who will not only take care of you, but also care about you. I didn't see them kiss the pie slipped out of my hands and fell to the floor with a clatter. They pulled away from each other, and their faces had the same look of shock on them when they saw me in the doorway. Evie! Parker jumped up, his face pale. I didn't expect. It's not what you think. Marilyn, however, did not look embarrassed. She calmly got off the table, put on her shoes, and walked over to me, stopping in a puddle of blueberry syrup dripping from the broken pie. I was just showing him that it was possible to pick a better version of you, she said with the same predatory smile. All your life you've only been first because you were born first. Now it's my turn to be first. After that night in Parker's office, I didn't leave the apartment for 3 days. I didn't open the bakery. I didn't answer the phone. On the 4th day, my mom came in. Parker called me, she said, sitting down at the table. Said you two had a fight. We didn't have a fight. My voice was hoarse. I caught him with Marilyn. Mom frowned, but didn't look surprised. Evie, maybe it was a misunderstanding. I set the cup down with such force I almost broke it. A misunderstanding? Seriously? You know your sister, Mom waved her hands. She can be impulsive. And men are weak to beautiful women. I couldn't believe my ears. Are you making excuses for them? No, of course not. It's just, maybe you should talk to Parker. No, I said firmly. It's over. The next morning, I opened the sweet corner at the usual time, kneaded the dough, melted the chocolate, whipped the cream. The movements were mechanical, but gradually the familiar rhythm of the work began to calm the emotions raging inside. I decided to fully immerse myself in my work. I invented new recipes, experimented, hung flyers. I was the last one to arrive at the bakery at 4 in the morning and the last one to leave. The bakery slowly became my salvation. There, I felt competent, needed. However, the financial situation remained difficult. Rent in Ogden was high, and competition was fierce. After all the bills were paid, I barely had enough for personal expenses. And then there was Marilyn. She wasn't content to steal my fiancé. She had to keep reminding me of it. 2 weeks after the incident, I ran into her at the supermarket. Evie! She exclaimed with fake joy. How are you? You look tired. I'm fine, I replied dryly, trying to sidestep her. Parker and I moved into a new house, she continued, defiantly fixing her hair so that the familiar emerald ring glinted on her finger. My ring. You'd love it. Huge kitchen. A dream. Good for you, I said, and pushed the cart forward. Evie! Marilyn grabbed my hand. Don't be mad. That's life. Some people are meant to be first, and some people are meant to be, and some are meant to be the leftovers. These chance encounters were a regular occurrence. It was as if Marilyn was specifically looking for me to humiliate me, to demonstrate her triumph. But the real blow came at my mom's birthday party. I baked a special cake, 3 layers of vanilla sponge cake with strawberry mousse. Mom was thrilled, but her delight didn't last long. Marilyn waited until everyone was at the table, stood up and tapped her fork on her glass. Parker and I have news, she announced, glowing. We're expecting a baby. Mom awed and rushed to hug Marilyn. Everyone clamored to congratulate the happy couple. I sat with a frozen smile on my face. Parker caught my gaze and quickly averted his eyes. He didn't look so much happy as stunned. Later, Marilyn approached me in the kitchen, where I was washing dishes. I wish you'd never have kids, she whispered with fake sympathy. Time is running out. I gritted my teeth, but I didn't say anything. You know, Parker's so thoughtful, Marilyn continued. He makes me herbal tea every morning. You should see the way he lights up when he talks about fatherhood. I'm happy for you, I said in an even voice. I really am. But if you came here just to rub my nose in my failure one more time, you're wasting your time. I don't care. It was a lie, and Marilyn knew it. But something in my tone silenced her. The following weeks, I worked even harder at the bakery. One of those evenings, as I was getting ready to close up, there was a real storm outside. It rained like a bucket. The wind bent the trees, and thunder rumbled. I was wiping down the tables when the door swung open and a gust of wind blew into the bakery, along with a soaking wet man. Excuse me, he said, pulling off his wet jacket. Are you still open? It's a real flood out there. Of course, I said. Have a seat. Would you like some coffee? It'll keep you warm. You're my savior, the man said gratefully. Black, please. I made coffee and brought it to him, adding a fresh croissant to the order. Thank you. He sipped his coffee and nodded approvingly. It's good. Usually small bakeries are a disaster, but yours is perfect. I'm serious about coffee, I smiled. You're the owner? Yeah, for 5 years now. That's impressive. Not an easy business, especially for an independent owner. I shrugged. It can be tough, but I love what I do. You can tell. He looked around the bakery. It's cozy, and the croissant is divine. Do you know your way around a bakery? More of a connoisseur than an expert, he smiled. Garrett Vollmer, by the way. Evelyn Hatcher, I shook his hand. Nice to meet you, Evelyn Hatcher. Would you care to keep me company? Unless you're busy, of course. I hesitated. Normally, I avoided personal conversations with clients, especially men. But this Garrett Vollmer seemed, safe. I have more coffee, I said, pouring myself a cup and taking a seat across from him. The man was a great conversationalist. He told me that he worked in finance. At this point, my heart sank, but I tried not to let it show, and that he'd come to my bakery by accident, rushing to a meeting that had been canceled because of the storm. We talked about the bakery, the challenges of small business, and trends in the culinary world. Garrett asked thoughtful questions and really listened to the answers. It was extraordinary. You have talent, Garrett said as he finished his second croissant. And a flair for flavor combinations. I've been to famous bakeries in Paris, but your croissants are just as good. I felt myself blushing. Thank you. It's a pity not everyone shares your opinion. The last few months have been, difficult. Business hasn't been going well. Let's just say I knew what I was getting into when I opened the bakery. Sometimes it just seems like the odds are against you. The storm gradually subsided. Garrett glanced at his watch and sighed. I have to go. Thank you for the shelter and the lovely evening. He paid for his coffee, leaving a generous tip, and headed for the door. He turned around on the threshold. I'd like to come back, if you don't mind. I nodded, suddenly feeling a little disappointed that he was leaving. I'd be glad to see you, Mr. Vollmer. Garrett, please. He smiled and walked out into the drizzling rain. The next day, he came again. And the day after that. And the day after that. Gradually, our conversations became more personal. I learned that Garrett was 42, had been divorced for 7 years, had no children, lived alone in an apartment overlooking the mountains, liked hiking and jazz. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, when Marilyn again accidentally met me and talked for half an hour about her problems with toxicosis, I could not stand it. I have a sister, I began as we sat with Garrett after closing time. A younger one, Marilyn. And I told him everything about our childhood, about the rivalry, about how she stole Parker, and even about her pregnancy. Garrett listened without interrupting, his face serious but not judgmental. And you know what the worst part was? I finished. Part of me still wants her approval, wanted to prove to her that I was worth something too. Garrett paused, thinking about what I'd said. You don't have to prove anything, Evelyn, he said finally, especially to someone who doesn't appreciate you for who you are. After that conversation, something changed between us. Garrett became not just a regular, but a friend. He came in almost every night, sometimes helping me close, sometimes just sitting with his laptop, working while I finished my business. One day, he came in with a folder under his arm. I have a proposal, he said, spreading out papers on the table. A business plan for expanding your bakery. I looked at the papers in amazement. It was a detailed, well-thought-out plan, including marketing strategy, financial projections, even suggestions for interior design. You, did this for me? Consider it a thank you for all those nights you let me stay up late. It's amazing, I admitted, but I can't afford that kind of investment. What if I told you I'd be an investor? I believe in your talent. I shook my head. I can't accept such an offer. It's too, personal. Garrett nodded understandingly. I respect your decision, but if you change your mind, the offer still stands. From that day on, our relationship took on a new color. We began to get to know each other more outside the bakery, going to the movies, eating lunch together, once even climbing Mount Ogden in the early morning to catch the sunrise. And Marilyn became increasingly nervous. Her visits and chance encounters became more frequent, but now there was something desperate about them. She still bragged as much, but I noticed the shadows under her eyes, the strained smile. One day, my mom called me in a panic. Evie, you have to come. Marilyn's here, and she's not okay. I rushed to Mom's house and found Marilyn sobbing on the couch. Mom stood helplessly by her side, not knowing how to comfort her daughter. What's wrong? I asked, surprised at the sincerity of Marilyn's tears. I lost my baby, she whispered, looking at me with reddened eyes. 3 weeks ago. I sank down beside her, not knowing what to say. Despite everything she had done to me, in that moment, I saw her as just a woman who had lost a child. I'm so sorry, I said sincerely. Parker doesn't know, Marilyn continued, wiping away her tears. I couldn't tell him. He was so caught up in the idea of fatherhood, and I was afraid he'd... She didn't finish, but I understood. Afraid that he would leave, that without the baby, she'd lose her power over him. You have to tell him, I said firmly. It's not something you can hide. Marilyn shook her head, a familiar, stubborn expression on her face. No, I'm going to get pregnant again, soon. He won't notice. I glanced over at my mom, whose face reflected the same anxiety I was feeling. Marilyn, Mom began gently, you can't do this. It's not fair to Parker. Is it fair that I lost the baby? Marilyn snapped back. It's not fair. I was supposed to be a mother. I was supposed to show everyone. At that moment, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Marilyn was as much a prisoner of our rivalry as I was. She had built her life on trying to outdo me, and it made her unhappy. 3 months had passed since the day Marilyn confessed to me the loss of her child. A lot has changed in that time. My bakery started to bring in a steady income. I hired a part-time assistant, a culinary art student named Jessie, a girl with blue strands in her hair, and a genuine love of baking. My relationship with Garrett was evolving too. We still didn't call it a relationship, at least out loud, but I could feel something real growing between us. That morning, I was experimenting with a new recipe for lemon tarts when the phone rang. The number was an unfamiliar one, prefixed with Salt Lake City. Ms. Hatcher, my name is Olivia Montgomery, and I'm the corporate events manager for Vollmer Investments. We've been reviewing bids to provide desserts for our corporate events, and we're interested in your proposal. I almost dropped the rolling pin. A month ago, I submitted a bid to a tender, put out by one of the state's largest investment firms. It was more of a gamble. I sent a portfolio with photos of my best work, not even hoping for a response. You did? I'm really glad you're interested in my proposal. We especially like your emphasis on using local ingredients. We'd like to invite you to a meeting to discuss details and a tasting. How about Tuesday at 2 p.m.? I immediately called Garrett to share the news, but got to voicemail. Strange, he usually picked up. He did mention that he was having a busy week, though. I spent the next few days preparing for the meeting, writing menus, baking samples for tasting, finding the perfect combination of flavors and textures. The Falmer Investments office was located in one of Salt Lake City's most prestigious skyscrapers, 23rd floor. I froze, remembering that Parker's office was also on the 23rd floor of a building in the business district. But it couldn't be the same. Or could it? I was greeted in the conference room by an elegant woman, Olivia Montgomery. "Mr. Vollmer will join us in a moment," she said. Mr. Vollmer? The last name was familiar, but I figured it was just a coincidence. The door opened, and I froze. Garrett walked into the room, my Garrett wearing an impeccable suit, a leather folder in his hands, exuding a confidence and authority I'd never seen in him before. "Garrett?" I breathed out, unable to hide my surprise. "Evelyn?" He nodded slightly, his face expressing nothing but professional interest. "I'm glad you could make it." Olivia shifted her gaze from him to me. "Do you two know each other?" "Ms. Hatcher owns a bakery I visit sometimes," Garrett said quietly. "She has great coffee." "Great coffee? That's it?" After months of our conversations, our dinners together, after everything I'd entrusted him with, I felt the color flood my cheeks. The meeting went on like a blur. I mechanically answered questions, presented desserts, discussed a possible menu. Garrett acted completely professional. No outsider would have ever guessed that we knew each other better than bakery owner and casual customer. "Well, I think we can work together," Garrett finally said. "Olivia will prepare the contract. Do you have any questions, Ms. Hatcher?" I had many questions, but none of them had to do with the contract. "No, I'm clear," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Good." Garrett stood up. "Olivia, show Ms. Hatcher out and go over the details. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. He walked out without even looking at me. I felt something inside me break. All this time. He owned Fulmer Investments, and he never once mentioned it. When the formalities were over, Olivia escorted me to the elevators. "You know," she said, "Mr. Vollmer personally insisted on reviewing your application. He's not usually involved in decisions like this." I froze. "Really?" "Yes," Olivia smiled. "He said your bakery was the hidden gem of Ogden. His words, not mine. The elevator came, but I was in no hurry to get in. Tell me, does Parker Wells work for your company?" Olivia's smile faded slightly. "Mr. Wells?" "Yes, he's one of the junior partners. Although he's been going through a rough patch lately." "What do you mean?" "Nothing much," she answered quickly. "Just work stuff. You know him?" "We know him," I answered evasively. I walked out of the building in total confusion. Garrett wasn't just working in finance. He was the owner of the company where Parker worked. He had to know about our history. All this time he's been lying to me? Was he using me to get back at Parker? Or was it just a game to gain the trust of a naive provincial baker? The phone rang, snapping me out of my daze. "Garrett." I dropped the call. A minute later, the message came back. "We need to talk. Can I come over?" I didn't answer, but an hour later there was a knock on the door. Garrett stood on the doorstep with a look of genuine concern on his face. "Evelyn, please," he said. "Let me explain." I stepped back silently, letting him into the apartment. "I should have told you," he began. "I know, but I was afraid you'd misunderstand." "Misunderstand what?" My voice sounded colder than I expected. "That you're my ex's boss? That you knew about us all along? That you've been using me for—" "What?" "No." Garrett took a step toward me, but stopped when he saw me pull away. "Evelyn, I never meant to use you. I knew who you were when I first walked into your bakery. I knew about you and Parker, but what happened next was real. I swear to you. Why didn't you tell me? At first, I didn't want to scare you. And then I was afraid you'd think exactly what you're thinking now. That I used you." Then why did you come to my bakery? If you knew who I was? Garrett sighed. I heard about you from Parker. When I was in that neighborhood for a meeting, I just wanted to know what kind of person you were. It was curiosity, nothing more. And then? And then I tasted your croissants. A slight smile touched his lips. And we talked. And I realized you're amazing, smart, talented, kind. I wasn't planning on coming back, but I couldn't help myself. And you just, forgot to mention that you own an investment firm? That you're Parker's boss? I didn't forget, Garrett admitted. I deliberately left it out. First, because I wanted you to recognize me, the real me, not my position or my fortune. And then I was afraid of losing what had begun to grow between us. He approached me, cautiously, as if afraid to scare me off. Evelyn, I've fallen in love with you, not Marilyn's sister or Parker's ex. You, the woman who bakes the best croissants in the state, who reads Vonnegut and loves old black and white movies. I felt tears coming to my eyes. I didn't want our relationships to be built on a foundation of revenge or resentment, Garrett continued. I wanted it to be about us. Just us, without the shadow of a past relationship. I made the mistake of hiding the truth, and I apologize for that. Part of me wanted to push him away, to protect myself from more pain. But the other part, the part that had gotten to know Garrett over the months, whispered that he was telling the truth. I don't know, Garrett, I whispered. I don't know if I can trust again. I understand. He took my hands gently in his. And I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that my feelings are real. I stared into his eyes, trying to find even a shadow of a lie or manipulation. But all I saw was sincerity and fear. Fear of losing me. Are you really in love with me? I asked, surprised at my own boldness. With all my heart, he answered without hesitation. And I believed him. Perhaps it was reckless. Perhaps I was wrong again. But something deep inside told me that this time it was real. Our relationship grew even stronger after that confession. Garrett was patient and told me all about his company, about Parker's problems with risky deals, about how he'd started his own business from scratch 20 years ago. And a month later, during a weekend in the mountains, he made me an offer, just asked if I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. I said yes. We decided to get married quietly, no grand ceremony. Just the two of us, a judge and two witnesses, Jesse and Olivia. No one in the family knew, not Mom, much less Marilyn. 2 weeks after the wedding, Mom invited me over for dinner. She looked tired, but she was happy to see me. I had planned to tell her about my marriage, but I discovered that Marilyn was also invited. Fortunately, she came alone. Parker, she said, was late for work. Marilyn was still pretending to be pregnant, even though it had been over 4 months since she had confessed to me. Her belly looked suspiciously perfect under her tight-fitting dress, but Mom didn't seem to notice anything. We picked neutral colors for the nursery, Marilyn chirped, stroking her fake belly. We want everything to be perfect. What's new with you, Evie? She asked with fake interest. Still alone? Marilyn, Mom said reproachfully. What? I'm just asking. Marilyn shrugged innocently. I'm doing fine, I replied calmly. The bakery is thriving. I won a contract to cater corporate events for a large company. Really? Marilyn looked surprised. What company? Vollmer Investments. I couldn't help but smile slightly as I noticed her flinch. Apparently, Parker had mentioned the company name back home. Oh, Marilyn quickly lost interest. Well, that's nice. At least there's some income, right? See, by the time you're 40, your bakery will probably be paid off, and I'll be traveling on a yacht by then. I wanted to respond, but I figured now was as good a time as any for my news. Actually, I wanted to tell you something, I began, taking a deep breath. I got married. Mom dropped her fork, and Marilyn choked on her water. What? Mom exclaimed. When? To who? 2 weeks ago. His name is Garrett Vollmer. I met him at my bakery. Vollmer? Marilyn asked, her face pale. Like the Vollmer from… Yes, he's the owner of Vollmer Investments, I confirmed. But why didn't you say so before? Why weren't we invited? Mom looked hurt. We wanted a quiet ceremony, I explained. Just us and the witnesses. I'm sorry, Mom. I know it's sudden. Where is he now? Marilyn asked, clearly trying to get over the shock. In New York, at a conference. He'll be back in 3 days. Mom stood up to hug me, but suddenly staggered. Her face contorted in pain, and she pressed her hand to her chest. Mom! I jumped up to her. What's wrong? It's a little hard to breathe, she exhaled, slumping back in her chair. It's been happening lately. Often? I looked at her worriedly. Have you seen a doctor? I didn't want to bother you. Mom smiled weakly. It's just age. Mom, it's not just age, I frowned. I'm making an appointment for you to see a cardiologist tomorrow. While I helped Mom take the medicine she kept in her purse, Marilyn sat silent, looking suddenly confused. Mom, you need to rest, I said as I helped her up. I'll stay the night, okay? Mom didn't mind, which was a worrying sign. She usually hated being treated like a sick person. When I put her to bed, Marilyn was still sitting at the table, staring pensively into space. So you married Boss Parker, she finally said when I returned to the dining room. That's unexpected. Life is full of surprises, I said quietly, gathering the dishes. Marilyn looked like she wanted to say something, but changed her mind. Instead, she stood up and started packing. I have to go. Parker is probably home by now. On the threshold, she stopped and turned to me. Evie, do you really think it's serious with Mom? There was something in her voice that made me soften. I don't know, but I'd better check. You could visit her more often, you know? Marilyn nodded without looking at me and walked quickly out. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, listening to my mom breathing in the next room. I thought about Garrett, about our future, about the strange twist of fate that had brought us together, and about how Parker would react when he found out I'd married his boss. The thought didn't make me gloat, but rather sad, like I was closing a chapter of my life full of pain and disappointment. In the morning, I took my mom to the cardiologist. The news was disappointing. She needed a serious examination and possibly surgery. Her heart was more worn out than she admitted. When Garrett returned from his trip, we had a long discussion about how best to help Mom. He insisted on paying for treatment at the best clinic, and I agreed, overcome with pride. Mom's health was more important than anything else. Mom gradually accepted my marriage to Garrett, though she still regretted not attending the wedding. We promised to have a big celebration later when she was better. After the funeral, we stopped by the bakery on the way home. I wanted to make sure Jessie was doing well. My assistant, despite her impressive 6-month belly, insisted on opening Sweet Corner after lunch. Life goes on, boss, she said, with her characteristic directness. And people still need sweets. There were several customers in the bakery, our regulars, who stopped by every day for fresh croissants or coffee. They expressed their condolences and said warm words about Mom, even though most of them had never met her. It was touching to realize that I had created not just a business here, but a small community. It's okay, Evie, Jessie assured me, stroking my stomach. Go home and get some rest. I'll lock up. At home, in the cozy little house Garrett and I had bought 6 months ago, I finally let myself exhale. All day I'd been holding my own, keeping my composure and dignity. Now, in the safety of our space, the tension was starting to let go. Are you okay? Garrett asked, handing me a cup of tea. I don't know, I answered honestly, settling down on the couch. Sad, of course, but also light in a strange way. Like something was over, not just my mom's life, but something in me. He sat down next to me, putting his arm around my shoulders. It's normal. Relationships with parents are complicated, even after they're gone. I thought about Parker's reaction today, the shock on his face when he realized Garrett was my husband. about how Marilyn tried to keep a straight face, but her hands shook, giving away her true emotions. Do you think their marriage will break up? I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. I don't know, Garrett shrugged, but judging by what's going on in the office, Parker has applied for a transfer to the Seattle branch. If he's approved, he'll be leaving in 2 weeks. I've been digesting that information. He's going to Seattle. He's leaving Marilyn. After all she'd been through for him. The betrayal of her sister, the lies about the pregnancy, her manipulations. She'll be furious, I muttered. Or desperate, Garrett said quietly. People don't always react the way we expect them to. There was a wisdom in his words that I couldn't ignore. Perhaps Marilyn's despair would be deeper and more painful than I'd imagined. But that was no longer my concern. The next morning, I drove to Mom's house. Now my house. According to the will. I had to sort through things, decide what to keep, what to give away, what to throw away. I expected it to be an agonizing process, but instead, I felt a strange peace as I went through photos, books, old letters. In the drawer of my bedside table, I found a small leather notebook. Mom's handwriting, neat, with a distinctive slant to the right, was instantly recognizable. A diary? I'd never seen Mom keep a diary. The first entry was dated on my 7th birthday. Evie turned 7 today. Marilyn ruined her party again, pushed her into the cake while blowing out the candles. Everyone was laughing, thinking it was funny, but I saw Evie's face. She was so upset, even though she was trying to smile. I should have intervened, I should have said something, but I couldn't. As always, Marilyn reminds me of my mother-in-law. The same bossiness, the same ability to make everyone around her bend to her will. I'm afraid of her, even though she's just a child. I'm afraid of her like I was afraid of my mother-in-law. As I turned the pages, a completely different picture of our childhood unfolded in front of me than the one preserved in my memory. Mom had seen everything every time Marilyn had hurt me, every injustice. But instead of protecting me, she retreated, paralyzed by her fears and complexes. The last notes were made shortly before her death. Evie is happy at last. That Garrett is a good man. I can see the way he looks at her. With respect, with love. Marilyn is still playing her games. I know she's lying about the pregnancy. I can see it in her eyes. I wonder if Parker realizes. I feel so bad for Evie. All her life, I let Marilyn push her around, take advantage of her. And now, it's too late to fix anything. I closed the journal, feeling a lump rise to my throat. All these years, I thought Mom didn't notice or believe what was going on. Turns out she just couldn't find the strength to confront it. The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my musings. Marilyn! I'd recognize the sound of her footsteps out of 1,000. Evie, are you in here? Her voice sounded unusually uncertain. Upstairs, I said, quickly wiping away my tears. She walked up to Mom's bedroom, stopping in the doorway. Without makeup, in simple jeans and a sweater, with her hair in a ponytail, she looked younger and more vulnerable. Unpacking? She asked, looking around at the boxes on the floor. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I can help, Marilyn offered tentatively, if you want. It was so unlike her to offer help rather than demand it. Sure, I said, pointing to the stack of books. You can see if there's anything in there you'd like to take. We worked in silence, each immersed in her own thoughts. After an hour, she suddenly spoke up. Parker is leaving for Seattle. I looked up. Her face was still, but there was pain in her eyes. I know, I said quietly. Garrett told me. Of course he did, she grinned bitterly. Boss husband. Convenient. I didn't react to the teasing. Instead, I asked, Are you going with him? Marilyn shook her head. He didn't invite me. He said he needed space and time to think. She made quotation marks with her fingers. Translation. He didn't need me anymore. I set aside the photo album I was thumbing through and sat on the edge of the bed. I'm sorry, Marilyn. You are? She looked at me with genuine surprise. I thought you'd be happy. Justice has been served. Karma has caught up with the villain and all that. I'm not happy about your misfortune, I said honestly. I never have. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Why not? I would be. I was always glad when things went wrong for you. Her candor stunned me, but I appreciated it. Because I'm not you, Marilyn, I replied simply. She flinched as if I'd hit her. Then suddenly she laughed, a bitter, barking laugh. Yes, you're not me. You were always better. Kinder, more patient, more talented. Everyone loved you. Dad, teachers, friends. But me. I was always number two. I always felt I had to shout louder, be brighter, get attention any way I could. That's not true, I countered. Mom always put you first, always protecting you, even when you were wrong. Because she was afraid of me, Marilyn said bitterly. Not love, fear. I thought about the diary and didn't say anything. Do you know why I stole Parker? She asked, looking out the window. Not because I was in love. It was because I couldn't stand the thought of you having a perfect life. You didn't deserve happiness any more than I did. I felt something clench in my chest. Not anger, not resentment, but a deep, pinching pity. And now? I asked. How do you feel now? Marilyn stared at her hands for a long time, as if seeing them for the first time. Emptiness, she said at last. I got everything I wanted, a husband, money, status, but no happiness, just emptiness. We sat in silence, realizing that the invisible wall that had stood between us all our lives was crumbling. What will happen to the house? She finally asked. Mom left it to you, didn't she? Yes. I didn't see the point in lying. But if you want any of the stuff? No, she shook her head. I don't need anything. I've already taken too much from you. She stood up, getting ready to leave. Marilyn! I called out to her. Maybe we should, I don't know, try to start over? Now that everything's changed. She stopped at the door without turning around. I don't know how to do this, Evie, she said quietly. I don't know how to be a normal sister. I'm not sure I'm capable of it. I don't know either, I admitted. But we could try. Marilyn turned, and in her eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Hope. Maybe, she whispered. In time.